Hey guys, Ian here and Christine.
Hi.
We're just on our way to the airport, leaving Melbourne, and we've just done a 2-week tour around the cities. So we did Perth, Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sydney, Parramatta, Melbourne and Glen Waverley. So we've just finished last night and really happy with the amount of people that are seeing what we're trying to do around the community and trying to get more people to invest in the community first, and as a subsequent outcome, the community, your pocket gets a benefit. So remember, it needs to make sense before it makes dollars, and that's something that I realised. And obviously the topic for today says says that there is no such thing as a finish line. So I just want to talk about that because we've just finished this tour, but the finish of this tour is only really the start of the next part of what we have to do in our lives, and it happens with every part of your life. So remember that, you know, the book we wrote, Small is New Big, Health, Wealth, Love and Happiness, is about the starting of little components of your life to finish, so that only just brings on the next start line. And if you look at Usain Bolt, for example, his finish of his career had many different starts that only lasted 10 seconds and less, you know, world record at 9.62 I think, to run 100 meters. And what he's doing now is the start of a whole new life. Now for him, he's probably got a whole bunch of coaches around him that are going to help him through the next part of his life that has something that will require some fulfillment. And you know, when we look back 4 years ago, Cara, start reading, Cara. I've been asked to put the audio book together, so when I've got half a second, we'll start putting that together. But good morning, Josie. So when it comes to 4 years ago, that was the finish for Christine and I of doing developments, putting money in the bank, and being what I thought would be extraordinarily happy because we're making money and all that. So I thought money was going to make me happy. And then I realized that that was the finish line of not being fulfilled with what we were doing. Hey, Luke, must be overseas. And the fulfillment of what we're doing now started 4 years ago. And I believe that this part of it has a finish line in the next 15 years, and so it's a big play for us. So our big play is that it started 4 years ago, and essentially it's a 20-year project, and our 20-year project is about teaching people how to invest in the right style of accommodation for Australia, so that we can oversupply the market for the right style of people, and then get to a point where that oversupply will create, one, the benefits of lower accommodation, which will give, when I say lower, affordable accommodation depending on how much you earn. So affordability for someone who earns 30 grand is different to someone who earns 50 grand, which is different to someone who earns $100,000. And with that component of thinking about creating smaller spaces that are better worked, have better functionality, and essentially have more space because of the way they use it. And you know, the beauty and the benefit with that is that people can save money. And the affordability issue in Australia happened simply because we cut out the smaller spaces and started building big houses, and now they build small houses that are called apartments, and Australians aren't ready for apartments. So what we actually need is smaller homes, not smaller houses or apartments. And those homes have to have a benefit of making sure that everything is, if you can make it, self-contained and share some part of communal area. And so the finish line is only really the start line of something else. And in 20 years time, maybe this video will still be available. I'm not sure that Facebook will still be around in 20 years time. It'll probably go into the same search engine where you find MySpace, and we'll be on something else, I suppose. Who knows what we'll be doing? Maybe we'll have floating vision on our windscreens of cars that are driving us around with a electronic man pretending to be our friend. And we'll look back at this video and go, you know what, 20 years ago, a tribe of people got together to start a race of bringing affordability back to this country. And I know the tiny house movement think that that's the answer. Tiny house movement is a part of an answer, and I actually think it's a small part of the answer to the affordability issue in Australia. So doesn't matter what you do, there's always going to be a start line and a finish line, and so the finish line is only really the start of the next the next part of whatever you're doing. And the good news is that it makes you grow so much more. The bad news is while you finish that line, it makes you feel good. Like Usain Bolt, I believe that he's going to go through a period of upheaval around having an emptiness in his life and trying to find for himself something that's worthy of a cause for him to move forward. Now, he may already have that. I'm only just suggesting that I've seen in the past people that get to that point. You know, you look at Cathy Freeman, the pinnacle of her career was winning the gold medal in Sydney in 2000, and she ended up in a position where not much longer, so where are we, 2012, so 10 years down the track, completely unfulfilled, having a huge amount of weight put on, getting herself to a point where she was a diabetic, and the start of her race was to find her passion. Took her a little while, and thank you to Robert De Castella, who's an amazing advocate for health, an amazing advocate for Indigenous people in this country, even though he wasn't Australian born, interestingly enough, Robert De Castella. So he started talking to Cathy because he has a business that looks at nutrition, and particularly nutrition in children and the Indigenous. And so from that, he spoke to Cathy and got her training again, and she ended up in New York. Turn left onto Power Street towards Westgate Bridge. So she ended up in New York in 2012 to run the New York Marathon with the rest of the Indigenous Marathon Project, and with her was the whole team, and I went over there as well. So I happened to be there in 2012, and that's when Cyclone Sandy had gone through New York. So we left Australia knowing that we were going to go over there. So the start of my first marathon, which I thought was going to finish, was really the start of something really big for me. And when we got over there, we actually found out at the airport that it had been called off. And at the airport, that was an interesting scenario because there were a lot of people that didn't handle that news very well. And the ultimate play there was that the mayor at the time, if he would have called off the marathon too early, there would have been a number of hotels throughout the whole of New York that would have been essentially possibly empty because people wouldn't have come over for the marathon. And I think it was a play to try and get some revenue into the city, and I think that play was okay, but it should have been done differently. It should have been, we're going to cancel the marathon, but we do want people to come and enjoy their trip and also help out people and come and clear rubbish around for us and do whatever. Now, unfortunately, when we got over there, it was called off, but fortunately that was the start of something big for me, because while I was standing at the baggage claim waiting for my bag to come out, I met an Australian rugby league player who I knew from, you know, watching him play for North Sydney, playing for Australia, and also playing for Queensland, where he's most famous for. So he's Queensland, he's famous for coming down the tunnel in, I think it was 1997, and for the first time ever they put a camera inside the tunnel as they walked out onto the stadium, and it was in the middle of the Super League war. There was a bunch of no-name Queenslanders that had come together to represent their state and completely depleted because the News Limited war on rugby league, ARL, and the NRL war meant that all the great Queensland players ended up in the other competition. So they brought these young kids through, and Billy was one of the guys who really was the leader in there. And as he's walking down the tunnel to come out onto the oval, he was so pumped up, and he'd pumped up all the boys, and he was yelling out the word Queenslander. And Queenslander was a term that was put together by previous Queensland players that basically was a call to say, it even gets me emotional thinking about it, which is a call to say, I've got nothing left in the tank and I need your help. I need you to lift and go. So he wasn't the first person ever to say Queenslander. He just happened to be the first person to say Queenslander on camera, walking down the tunnel, and he reckons he's been milking that baby ever since. So anyway, I met him at the baggage claim, and I just introduced myself because we lived in the same area, and he says, you realise he was the one who actually told me it was called off, and so there was a few, far out, I can't believe this. So we spent the next 3 days together with his wife, and not in a bad way. I didn't sleep in their room. I just basically hung out with them, and he told me all of his stories. How he motivates people as a motivational speaker. Now, the difference between Billy and every other sports commentator or sports speaker that speaks at a dinner party is that he's been able to translate his success on the field into his success in business. And that whole ability to show people that there is a start line and that there is a finish line, and that there's no mutual exclusivity to one part of your life. So when we talk about health, wealth, love and happiness, they're not mutually exclusive. They all affect each other in positive ways and also in negative ways if you're not looking after it. When we finally got home, and I got to run around Central Park with Kathy Freeman and Robert De Castella for a 10K run and the Indigenous Marathon team. And I would have maybe seen the marathon team for half an hour because I was raising money for the IMP project. And I got to spend a whole day with them. It was amazing. And it was really the start of Billy and I working together more often. And it also was the start of a really great relationship for myself and his wife. And I always say to Billy, I'm running off with a wife every morning, and that's because she's my training partner, my running partner. And she, when she goes fast, it hurts me, and when I go fast, it hurts her. So it's a really good combination. And we get to talk along the way, so we love a chat. And good old half empty, I call her. So that was a start of something, and a start of the transfer of what happened to us 4 or 5 years ago, and particularly me around the unfulfillment of not being able to do anything and passionately trying to help someone else out. Ultimately, we're put on this earth to grow, and if you're staying still, you're sitting in the middle of a 100-metre track, 50-metre line, sitting down and watching everyone else run past you. And it's not a competition. It's not a competition. In the end, you're only beating your start time. And so when I went over to do one marathon just so I could say I finished and done a marathon, it actually was only the start of doing many marathons, because the fulfillment and achievement of doing something in your life for yourself and for other people really essentially cements the start of something bigger. And when you get that right, when you get to the point where you realise that you're having a positive effect on other people, that's where your life starts to change. And for most of us, we're in that point. For some of us, we're still looking for it. For others, they've actually achieved what they wanted to do in that area and move on to the other ones. I noticed Mark jumped on, and he's done his tiny house, and now he's moved on to something different and same size or smaller than a tiny house, but he's floating on water now rather than towing on wheels. So, really, hey Neil, a really great thing. So remember that once you've achieved something and finished it, it's only the start of something new. And the good news is you grow, and the bad news is that you're going to have more upheaval than the last start of the last part of your life. You know, I come to the realization that for many years we were developing ourselves personally, and 3 times, unfortunately, I stopped that development thinking that I'd achieved everything that I need to, and I'd actually learnt everything that I needed to, and that I was going to be fulfilled and you know, complete for the rest of my life. What I've now realised is that it's, you know, and this happened again about 4 or 5 years ago. What I've realised now is that this trip that we are doing in this life is about fulfilling ourselves and growing. We are inherently genetically made up to be better. I mean, there's no other way to explain how we went from apes to humans, because we wanted to improve, and our genetics make that up. Our genetics say to us, if we're not actually going through the race and traveling through towards a finish line and many finish lines, we're not there. The only people that I believe that ultimately only ever get the complete finish line are those people that are so enlightened that they channel the energy of the universe. And I know it probably went a little bit deep there. However, you know, when you talk about Mother Teresa and Gandhi and Buddha and all those teachers that basically know and understand when they are done in this life and they completely channel energy, they go and sit under a tree, they lean against a tree trunk, they take their last breath, and they're completely finished. They've done what they need to do in this life. And when you think about, for example, Vipassana is a meditation technique where you do 10-day silent meditation. You do 11 hours meditation per day, no speaking during the 11 days. They feed you with vegetarian food, and they give you accommodation, and you turn up, and when you leave, you actually pay nothing or what you believe it was worth to you, depending on how much wealth you have, depending on how much fulfillment you've got, depending on how much you want to assist the next person to go through the same amount of change or stillness is probably the best way to explain it. And so the last person that led the whole community of Vipassana around the world was from India, and he was a businessman, a very successful Indian businessman, and he started to do this meditation technique and realized that there was more to life than just making money, and essentially gave up his entire wealth, all his belongings, and became the leader of this non-religious stillness meditation style. And it's been handed down from generation to generation. It stayed in its purest form into Burma, and then was brought back out. So amongst the other techniques that got taken to different countries, Burma stayed in its true technique and didn't get changed by the monks up in the hill. So when he got to the point where all these Vipassana centers were going on around the world, he started to meditate. He'd actually achieved fulfillment and the finish line, and would meditate 12 hours a day. And during this time where he was getting older, he realized, because he was so open to the universe, he had a realization that his time was getting shorter, and he could feel his body starting to shut down. So it's almost like a mechanic that listens to a car and can hear a tick or a tat, and they know where it's coming from. And for him, he could actually listen internally to his body. Now, for anyone who gets the chance to do a 10-day meditation, I hate doing them, but they're just so amazing to do, and you are just so, the whole point around the meditation and their catchphrase is be happy. So if you just Google be happy and meditation, you'll come up with these centers all over the world. There's 4 in Australia, I think. And so for him, he could feel it start to shut down. So he started to look at who he was going to pick to lead the community once he was gone. And of course, there were people all over the world that could possibly have taken up this head position to be the next person that takes themselves to enlightenment. And as the leader, he did something extraordinary. He downloaded, however that happened, a message through meditation that basically said, I'm not going to put one leader in charge here. Every centre around the world will have a leader of its own, and they will meet and they will take the community forward in one movement. And most importantly, he said, we're no longer charging to do the meditation. So previously they would charge a certain amount of money, depending on what country you were in, to have that meditation and have the 10 or 11 days. And what he found was that those people that truly were not ready for the stillness, and I can tell you, I don't drive my car there, I get dropped off, because otherwise if I had a car there, I'd be in the car and going home probably on the 4th day. I'd be all right to the 7th or 8th day, and then I'd be driving home. And he realized that people were staying when they didn't really want to be there because they put so much value on the dollar that they'd spent, even if it was very cheap, which it was. And we had the other end of the scale where he was saying that people paid an amount of money and then demanded the style of accommodation or the type of food that they should be getting. So his extraordinary decision was to say, no, we are no longer charging for this technique, and it's going to be a silent donation that people can give according to how they feel and according to what they believe the benefit was to them. And amazingly, all the places around the world still function, still run, and probably better than before. So on the Sunshine Coast, so in Australia, there is one in Katoomba, there's one on the Sunshine Coast, there's one in Perth, there's one in Victoria. And if anything, since he's passing away, they have actually increased the sizes, and they've got more growth in their community than they've ever had before. And so the start line for him started as a businessman, and he finished as a businessman when the start line overlapped with his his growth to finally sitting under a tree and having a realization that he was about to not be here anymore, so connected and so fulfilled, and yet still wanting more and knowing where he was going to. So that was a long story about fulfillment, but essentially, what's the key message today? Every morning you get up, there's a start line, and the finish line is when you go to sleep. There's many start and finish lines in your day, in your life, that happen over periods of time. And our big play, like I said, is to do this over 20 years. And this 20-year project that we've embarked on about 4 years ago is to change the landscape of Australian affordable housing outcomes so that young people and old people alike can actually be in accommodation that they mostly own, and there's not a lot of, the only rentals available will be the smaller rentals that will get people in a point of saving money so that they can get into their own home and raise their own family and get to that point. I think it's a crying shame that the majority of 20 to 25-year-olds believe that the only way they're going to be able to own a property is to wait for their parents to die and inherit their house. That's a crappy place to be. So let's say, Morning Sue, it's a place where I'm saying that we have start and finishes. I'm going through a shorter race at the moment, which creates a little bit of anxiety to me, but all I know I can continue to do is move along the track. Don't sit at the halfway mark and expect that you're going to be able to finish and that people are going to carry you across. There's only one person in this life that's going to help you get to the finish line, and that's you. So pick yourself up, make the decision, and start moving. There is nothing that you can do about anything that's in your life. You're in full control. Now I know there's a lot of people that say, but that person ripped me off and took my money, or that person actually punched me in the face. You were in the position that time, that day, you took your legs and got into that place. As harsh as that might sound, and as disagreeable as disagreeable as you may want to say around that topic, I believe wholeheartedly that you've made a decision to put yourself in that place to either be ripped off, to be able to get, you know, injured, to get something happen to you. You know, and you say, oh yeah, but what about that person that got shot or that died? You carried yourself into that position for what energy alignment was there. You know, there's the opposite end of that spectrum is that very few people often say to me, you know what, I'm so happy because of someone else doing this to me, or because of that happening to you. It's interestingly that we blame everyone else for the bad times in our lives, and we take all the success and take the accolades for the good things that happen in our life. So it's a really interesting point that, you know, may be able to be discussed later on, because I've heard someone talk about at an event how someone who is sexually assaulted is actually to blame for that. It's a very harsh thing to be able to stomach that. However, the way she explained it made a lot of sense to the situation, and also remember that all of these things is a growth pattern for you to get to your finish line. You know, no one ever wants to. I've got 4 daughters. The last thing I want to see is having them to go through any sort of pain that typically is not in their control, and it's an awful place to be. You know, so a lot of traffic ahead. So get my understanding when I say that. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be taking responsibility, because the person who assaults should never ever assault. And I'll finish with one more point. We had a post yesterday in the high res group around one of the students whose tenant essentially they've got a water leak, and it's obviously a waterproofing leak rather than a water leak. Sorry, Raymond, I'm just on my way out. I'm heading to the airport. I've got to get you next time. So I'm around on the 25th, 26th, Raymond, for our boot camp in Melbourne. So I'll see if we can make it in. Come back and do a boot camp. It's $249. Shameless plug there. Reduced from $495. So I had a post there about how their tenant was complaining that there was a water leak, which is fair enough. Complaining about lots of different things that needed to be repaired. And she'd been doing that, and essentially had sent a plumber out to do a pressure test on the pipe work. The test held, which means that it's a waterproofing issue. Now, just so you've got some lessons in plumbing and building here, if you've got a leak that is not constant, so it's a steady stream of water, if it's a steady stream of water, it's a water pipe leak, so a burst water pipe or cracked water pipe. If it's a water leak that happens in dribble, so it might happen, you know, it might rush, water might come out at a certain pace and then slow down, and then come out at a certain pace and slow down, that's more likely to be a waterproofing or a sewerage issue, drainage issue. So anyway, so it turns out that this is likely to be a waterproofing issue. She'd decided with the tenant that the best thing for the tenant to do was to actually terminate the lease. Both parties agreed to that, and then she was told, then she got an email from the tenant saying, I want a reduction in rent, and the reason I want a reduction is because I've had to pay extra water charges and I've had to pay extra power charges. So most landlords in that place would go back and want to have a bit of a tussle and a fight. And yesterday I spoke about negotiation, and the worst thing you can do in negotiation is actually come out fighting, and you want to build rapport. So she was livid. She really wanted to make sure that you know, the tenant got the double barrel that she was feeling, and I simply just gave her probably a 400-word response to be able to respond to the tenant around that. And I use the analogy that if you were standing in a pub, someone walks across the pub, gives you a shove in the chest and puts their fists up ready to go, and you put your fists up, the fight's on. However, if you stand there with your arms wide open and that person comes and hits you, there's one of two things happen. Firstly, you get hit, but you're not fighting back. But secondly, that person looks like the biggest asshole in the world and has done something incredibly wrong. Now remember, you're to blame for being in that pub to start with. They're to blame for actually activating and throwing the punch. And so the worst thing you can ever do is go back. Now, here's my haircut. It's 3 days old. It's a little bit better than what it was on Monday. So the difference between a good haircut and a bad haircut is about 4 days. However, I didn't handle myself well on Monday. I fought back. And once I caught myself, I was enough to go, okay, I just put my fists up, but now it's time for me to not do that again. Go back and talk it out. Now, the guy who threw the punch to me on Monday, the hairdresser, I wasn't even going to bother with him because he looked like an arsehole. The other people around, I needed to show them that I wasn't the arsehole. So the response that I'd written for the student was essentially, thank you for your email. I completely understand that the disturbance that the extra trade people coming in to repair anything that's happened in the property for the last couple of months has been something that neither you nor I required. However, every time you've asked for something to be repaired, I've sent someone in, and I believe that we've done our best to maintain the property to the standard that's appropriate for you to be able to live in. We both agreed that the best way to move forward was the termination of the lease. And with the termination of the lease, the reason behind this is that I have two choices to make here. I.e. either leave you in the property with your agreement and we arrange for the tradespeople to come in and out of the house whilst you're still there with your belongings, and they will create dust. I've been involved in this industry for a little while, and although I don't have a huge property portfolio, I understand that dust gets thrown around and will end up creating some mess around your property. The second option is that we terminate so that it's not going to create any angst for you. The last thing we want is to put you out. So in response to the rental reduction, because we've satisfied the needs of every time that you've had a repair need, we've repaired it, and this one requires the repairs to be done. We believe that firstly, that your water charges and the reduction in rent is not appropriate, considering that you don't pay any water charges. We as the landlord pay the water charges. And secondly, that the reduction in rent because of power is not required, considering that it isn't a water leak, and considering that we have a solar hot water heater on the roof. We believe that the reduction in rent wouldn't be appropriate in this time. So if you would like to allow the agent to know what decision you'd like to make moving forward, the ask for us to pay for your ability to move out is another option that's not available, as we quite clearly can put you in a position of terminating the agreement or staying in the property. Now, when you put it in that way, you've not been aggressive. There's no buts, there's no howevers, there's none of that put your fists up and throw a punch back. Now, with that sort of NLP'd, really nicely written, pragmatic, positive approach to a wording of either an email, a letter, or even verbally, you'll find that if they come back harder and they end up wanting to take you to tribunal, when you put that stuff in front of someone else to see, they look at it and they go, that person on the other side looks a bit like an arsehole. And so that decision will work in your favour. So, it's really important that we have an understanding, a full view of the world, and that the finish line, there's many start lines, there's many finish lines, and if you're sitting down in the middle of the track, get yourself up and get going. I say this very often to people, and it gets said to me very often as well. I'm no different to anyone else. So, okay. So the end of the tour, so excited for those people that came along and have joined the high-res community. It's very exciting to have you on. Very exciting to see the movement that you're going to make. Very exciting to see the properties that you're going to be putting to the market to put the right people in the right accommodation. So remember that 80% of our community require a studio or a one-bedroom self-contained apartment, and 80% of our stock are 3, 4 and 5 bedroom houses. Please stop building crappy houses as investment properties. It's a really important message. When the median rent for a 4-bedroom house in Melbourne is $420 a week, and the median rent for a 2-bedroom house in Melbourne is $415 a week, clearly there's something wrong in the marketplace. So live wherever you want. I don't care if you live in a mansion. We used to do that. We live now in 72 square meters, and we had a little bit of an interest yesterday around some guy who's calling himself the small space person and has designed a 170 square meter 1-bedroom home. Like, you just go, what the hell are you on? Like, we've got a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom, 2 living area rental property, which is a townhouse, which is 120 square meters. So don't tell me that, that you've done really well by building smaller when you've got 170. Even if it was 70, that's ridiculous. So we're actually building a 5-bedroom, 5-bathroom home for ourselves that's 130 square meters. And the students are saying, how the hell can you do that? And how we can do that is that we're doing that by creating space that functions better. So when I say that, our bedrooms are only bedrooms at night time. During the day, they're actually part of our living area. So why go and build these massive houses where 20 to 30 square meters per room is used for, 1/3 of your life when you're actually not really technically conscious, you're asleep. So stop building big homes. Anyway, that's the end of my message. Raymond, look on the Facebook page, the High Res Facebook group, and you'll see that video. Hopefully I'll do it during the weekend or today. We'll go from there. See you guys.